And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud host of the ABSA Champagne in Africa Festival 2024. ABSA is an authorized FSP and registered credit provider. Good evening. Welcome to your Money Show tonight. I'm Stephen Grootes. Obviously, everyone is holding their breath ahead of the American elections, ahead of the results, and I wouldn't advise it. I notice world markets generally firmer today, probably because they know better than to wait for the outcome of an American election, because if you're going to hold your breath, you're going to wait for quite some time. We're looking a couple of days at the very least, possibly a couple of weeks. 2000 was a month before we knew for sure. Either way, this could go on for quite some time. And the point, and I'm going to keep making this point, even though I may be a minority of one, whatever happens doesn't resolve the differences in the United States, doesn't resolve the divides in the United States, doesn't resolve the very real political problems and the social problems that they have to solve, that we've been able to solve some of our problems politically. They have not been able to solve some of their problems politically, and I think that's why issues like abortion, for example, will go on and on and on, and at some point, this might well hurt the world's biggest economy. Anyway, more on that in just a moment. We'll have a live update for you from someone who's actually watching people vote in the United States. Have you ever been online on your phone, I don't know, at an airport queue or something, or you're, sitting down and you're you've just got an idle minute and you've gone to a news website or EWN.co, whatever it is, and you sit down and there's a digital advert that flashes at you that really caught your attention, that you actually made you click on it. The times it's happened to me, it's usually been some product I didn't know already, I didn't know existed, about something I'm very interested in. So, for example, when inverters first came in, or something to do with, cycling. None of them made me go any faster. But the point I'm trying to get to is, we'll talk a bit more about digital advertising later, but does it change your behavior? Does it work? This is one of the great questions about advertising. Does it work? Well, obviously it does work. I mean, Coca-Cola might have been around for over 120 years. They still have a huge advertising budget, and there's a reason why they do that. But I suppose the question really is, does digital advertising work, and what has worked for you? Be really interested to hear your view on that tonight on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and of course 072 702 1702 for WhatsApp voice notes. I don't know if you've been through phases in your recent life where you've been sort of happier than others, and we sort of put the pandemic to one side because I think very few people were happy during the pandemic. But have you ever wondered if there's a correlation between how you're feeling financially and how you're feeling mentally? We'll explore that a little bit after 7:30. Looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a very important conversation. Good to hear from you tonight. Welcome to The Money Show. It's 11 after 6.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
We start, of course, like virtually every talk radio program around the world tonight that speaks in English. In the United States, where already millions of people have voted in early voting, lines appear to be forming in the 7 battleground states that could decide this election. And it is amazing. Despite all of the campaigning of the last few months, the race still looks like it's a toss-up. There is some polling now suggesting that it's currently unlikely the Republicans will take the presidency, Congress, and the Senate. But whatever happens over the next few days and weeks, it seems unlikely, really, that the U.S. will be able to heal the divisions we see in the election between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Kane Farabaugh is a multimedia journalist and Midwest correspondent at Voice of America. Kane, good day to you. I'm sure it's a very long day for you. We know millions of people have already cast their ballots in early voting in the U.S. What's happening around your country now that voting day has actually started?
Well, I'm actually here in the swing state of Wisconsin. And by the way, it's a pleasure to join you and be able to speak to you about all of this. But we're here in the swing state, or battleground state, as it might be referred to, of Wisconsin, which is one of the critical states that both candidates feel that they need to win in order to ensure their path to the White House. And so the questionable element here today is actually the weather. In Michigan and in Wisconsin, there was heavy rainfall overnight, and that continued into the morning when polling sites opened. Here in Wisconsin, they opened at 7 a.m., and it really was a downpour just until the time they opened up the area for voting. And I would say that weather is might impact in-person voter turnout, but as you noted there in the intro, a lot of votes have already been cast by early balloting, and that includes here in the state of Wisconsin.
And I suppose that the rain in Wisconsin then makes it very difficult to sort of gauge your mood. I mean, from South Africa, it looks like your country, unfortunately, is quite divided. That could lead to a complicated mood in some places. But I suppose also your country is divided geographically. So the mood in many places is going to be one of, we're happy to vote either way.
Well, I think what the polling tells us ahead of this election is that neither candidate is going to win this election overwhelmingly. And so the political division, the polarization that exists in this country isn't going to be resolved by this election. And regardless of the outcome of the election, there are issues that will still be fraught as they are discussed, and there's discourse about this, regardless of who wins the White House, who wins Congress, and who wins the Senate. The question is going to be who is or what is the party or who is the politician that will be able to bring Americans back together across a political divide. And I don't know that there is an answer that we see in either presidential candidate or in anybody whose messaging is running today. And a lot of that has to do with the way that our primary system works in this country. In order to win the nomination, be it for a seat in the Senate or even a congressional House seat, not to mention the presidency, you have to basically ensure that you have support from the base of your party. The Democrats need Democrats to turn out in primary elections in order to win the nomination, and Republicans the same. And so part of the polarization actually happens long before this election starts or this election campaign starts. It happens in that primary process. And to reach those voters, you need to appeal to them by a message which is directly aligned with those parties' principles.
Sure. I mean, it does suggest a longer term problem. I'm presuming that there'll be a high turnout in most parts of your country today. Could that have an impact on how long it takes before we know who'll actually be your next president?
Well, one thing you can note is that there's more than 75 million people here in this country that have cast early ballots in some way, either by mail or by voting in person, early at polling locations that were open prior to today's election day. So, that's around the numbers that it has been, I think, in the 2020 election. So the interesting point of this will be how many more Republicans have turned out to vote in this election versus the last election, because in the 2020 election, there was Republican messaging that was discouraging people from voting early or, showing up in person to vote early. They wanted people to vote on election day. That's changed in this election. There are a lot more Republicans now who have embraced the early voting idea. And so turnout has its affected today, and what the ultimate numbers will be is something that, we're not going to know, obviously, probably for weeks after this election is done. But we can already see some signs in the early voting, and that shows a more robust Republican participation in the early balloting process.
Obviously, much of the world is focused on the presidential race, and that's largely because it's slightly easier to understand. It's less complex than what's happening in the Senate and in the House, and because of the personalities involved. I mean, Trump is a sort of overwhelming personality in some ways. Whatever happens, it would seem, certainly markets suggesting this today, that in fact, no one's going to be able to control all three, or, all of it. No one's going to get the presidency, control of the Senate and control of Congress.
Americans have typically, at least in the last several election cycles, voted for divided government. It's been very difficult for any legislation to get passed because there is such a narrow margin of control. Certainly right now in the House of Representatives, the Republicans maintain control of that by just 4 seats. In the Senate, Democrats control the Senate just by 1 seat effectively, and the vice president being the tiebreaker. So this is the way that Americans have voted. This is the outcome previous elections have resulted in. And so there isn't any strong signal that that's going to change at the end of this election cycle. And again, we might not even know the outcome of House races for weeks, depending on the closeness of some of those tallies. And so you're exactly right. We're going to have divided government. It's going to be narrowly divided, which would indicate that there needs to be cooperation in order to get legislation and laws passed. But because of the polarization, because of the way that elections work, because of the support that, particularly in the House, when you race, you have a race every 2 years, it's like the campaign never ends, and you need that base of supporters to turn out in those primary elections to support you. So Americans are voting for divided government. that means that lawmakers have to work together, but they don't because of the polarization. And so we're in an endless cycle of which it seems like, at least from Americans' perspective, things don't get accomplished.
Kane, really do appreciate the time. I know you've got a long day ahead of you, a long month ahead of you, I suspect. Thank you very much indeed. Kane Farabaugh is a multimedia journalist and Midwest correspondent at Voice of America in the United States, live from a very wet Wisconsin this evening.
The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DSTV channel 856.
I don't know if you've noticed, but there seems to be a little bit more debate around tweaks to black economic empowerment over the last little while. Some of it provoked by the debate around whether Starlink satellites could really be switched on over South Africa. There was a comment last week from the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, Park Stow. He said his department would look at tweaking rules to make it easier for foreign-owned companies to comply with black economic empowerment legislation. At the moment, as I understand it, a foreign-owned company that wants to operate here has to be 30% owned by people who are legally defined as previously disadvantaged. Bruce Hunt is the managing director at Transcend Capital. He's been looking at this. Bruce, good evening to you and thanks for your time. So BEE's been kind of entrenched in our society. Are there ways, legal ways, to allow foreign-owned companies to operate here while retaining their current ownership structure? To put it another way, could Starlink operate here while still being owned by Elon Musk?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, Stephen. So just firstly, foreign companies can operate in South Africa without black ownership, but it's particularly the licensed environments. So, for example, Starlink and ICASA, where it's really, really important for them to get their 30% black ownership. Some of the other elements are maybe pressed more by their clients. But I think there's a really, really interesting opportunity for Starlink right now. And what the DTI has is a really amazing program. It was really, really slow, but it's picked up recently. It's called the Equity Equivalent Program. And effectively, this means a multinational, instead of actually giving up its own equity subject to certain criteria, can actually set up a program that can actually help develop the country, its citizens, through education or help building black businesses, and can get ownership credit in that way. There are challenges, of course, from an ICASA perspective, but I don't know if you'd like me just to set out how this really fits with some of the earlier days of Musk's companies and how it could actually, really resonate with him and some of the examples.
I mean, you would have to assess what the company is doing and whether that is actually making a difference, right? And I know, particularly in the cell phone space, as part of their licensing conditions, so networks like Vodacom, Cell C, MTN have always had to comply with legislation like that. That's not so much around BEE, but just having an impact in the market in a constructive way.
Absolutely. No, they certainly have. And when you look, I suppose, from a Starlink perspective, I mean, and when you look at these equity equivalent programs, where they really, really work is where there's market failure. So for example, if a multinational can come in and it can actually get some kind of leverage return to the actual people of the country, and actually it helps. And I think when you think again from a Starlink perspective, what really, really is interesting is if it could actually use these satellites in the rural areas where we really, really need bandwidth at the moment, and where they have excess capacity, and that could actually be almost donated as part of those solutions to either schools or to clinics or to or to small black businesses or things like that, you could get quite an outsized return that could be good for the business as well. But you're right, it doesn't work for all businesses. They need to fit in. But Amazon has been a case in point, and so has JP Morgan, where they've actually really managed to implement these in a very, very effective manner.
It would all boil down to money, doesn't it? I mean, for Starlink, it would mean that it would depend on the cost of providing a service like that for argument's sake, for rural areas, and how much money they're making out of everyone else, and out of the rest of the country. And I can just imagine the fight over whether, this small town is considered a sort of medium-sized town or a rural area, or whether the school qualifies and then other people are now using internet access at the school. What I'm trying to get to is I can just imagine some lawyer somewhere tying everyone up in a bit of red tape.
I think the lawyers in red tape, particularly we see that some of the larger cell phone companies do tend to go to court. Could be a bit of a challenge, I mean, also in terms of evading and finding loopholes in terms of the legislation from the ICASA perspective. So I suppose there's two elements. The first element is whatever gets done would have to fit in very clearly in terms of the current legislation. But I also then think the second part is if you tell a really good story and you have a real impact on places where the current operators are really backing to kind of penetrate, just because of the areas and the infrastructure and what the country is, bring yourself up for a lot more success. But the money is where it actually begins and ends. I really agree with you on that.
I wonder if, we have a coalition government. We know the DA's view of black economic empowerment legislation. They've got a deputy minister at the DTIC. This sort of comment by the Minister Parks Tau that these rules could be tweaked, could it lead, do you think, to a much bigger discussion around BEE? BEE has its critics, and it has its critics from people who say it hasn't worked and it hasn't empowered black people. And it has its critics from, I suppose you could say, sort of white business that say, well, we're not benefiting. There's criticism in many directions here. Do you get any sense that it might be about to change because of the coalition?
Yes, I definitely think there's going to be some changes. I'm seeing where we're getting far more meaningful transformation as well. So, for example, we look at so many of the Competition Commission rulings at the moment are saying employee workers. And if you look from an international perspective, employee ownership and worker ownership is heavily encouraged in countries that don't. They make the companies more productive. They make communities more stable. It makes a whole lot of sense. And then when you also see what the government's been doing and getting a bit more active on equity equivalents, for example, Amazon, JP Morgan, Citibank, and things like that, we're seeing things in the right direction. So I do think there is a requirement for them to figure out what really can actually help this country grow, as opposed to hold it back and keep foreigners out. And I think we also have two ministers in both Treasury and in the DTI, two deputy ministers, ANC and DA, in two very, very key economic cluster points. And I think this sets up us very nicely to figure out how we can get this right for the next 10 years.
Bruce Hunt, thank you very much indeed. Managing Director at Transcend Capital.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Kwena Maloko is from Equity Research Sales at Absa CIB. Kwena, good evening. Thanks so much for coming in tonight. Obviously, the United States, global markets seem to be a little firmer than I might have thought they would be today.
Yeah, Stephen, thanks for having me. I think everyone's just in a holding pattern more than anything. So if you look at the amount of trade that we saw on the JSE today on the equity side, just about 20 billion has exchanged hands. So people very much cautious of the outcome.
You're going to be cautious of the outcome for another week at least, isn't that the problem?
True. Very true. Like you said, we could wait a month until we get a final decision. But I think it's probably the prudent way to go, to sort of wait before you sort of deploy any more capital into our market, particularly given the sensitivity of the rand and our equity market to US events.
Sibanye-Stillwater, they ended the day, 10% up? Quite an update from them today.
10% up indeed. So, the 3Q numbers were quite impressive, right? So we saw about a 9% increase in one of their profit measures. A lot of that was due to the South African gold operations. So the rand gold price in itself was up 25%. So they're a big beneficiary from that. The platinum operations in South Africa were quite okay as well, 5% increase in profit, stable costs. The US, which has been a problem for them, still very much challenging in terms of costs, but they've announced a new sort of round of measures and cost-cutting initiatives that could potentially support profitability going forward. Another thing to point out is that the market was quite nervous about, their balance sheet and their ability to fund themselves, especially when PGM prices move so quickly. And I think today this update assured the market that there's a little bit more breathing room than we thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting to watch. And of course, the gold price has just been insane.
Phenomenal. We'll take it, right?
Well, let's see what happens during the course of the week in the US. Telco shares, MTN, Vodacom, I left one out. Telkom, all down today. That's because of the Competition Tribunal ruling.
Yes. So last week, the Competition Tribunal blocked Vodacom's deal to buy a 30% stake in CIVH, so also called Massive. So what's important in there is that that's the vehicle that houses Vumatel, right? So Vodacom's own fiber business only has about 170,000 homes. If they got the stake, they'd have exposure to about another 750,000 homes. And also Vumatel's existing network passes by another 2 million homes. So a very big opportunity and a very elegant way to get into the fiber business. Why this is important for the rest of the sector is that MTN was also considering a fiber strategy. If you recall previously, they tried to buy Telkom, right? A big competitor for Vumatel is the OpenServe business. So if we're seeing this type of M&A being blocked, it calls into question the entire sort of fiber to the home strategy, which, if you can't buy the big players, the other strategies is to build your own fiber network, which can be quite expensive, to buy smaller business, which carries execution risk. So I think that's what's being reflected in today's share prices.
And one of the frustrating things is it took 3 years just to get to this point, and there could still be another appeal.
100%. So we're not even in the appeals process from my understanding just yet. So we have to have the full findings published, and then we have to go into the appeals process. And even that's not a guarantee that they'll be allowed to move forward.
There's been so much talk about the sort of change in sentiment around the coalition government, and it's mentioned more often than artificial intelligence on this show. And we seem to get a data point today that maybe suggests things are changing. You're looking at new vehicle sales.
Definitely, and hopefully, the first of many positive data prints. So what we saw today is the NAAMSA vehicle sales for October. So that showed a 5.5% increase year on year. Why that's important is that it's specifically in the passenger car market where we've seen increases. It's not particularly you and I, because rates have gone down on buying new vehicles, but we're seeing the car rental guys come in and refleet quite aggressively. Why that's important is because if they're refleeting in that way, they anticipate big demand into this tourist season that's coming up. And look, we'll take whatever tourists we can get, right?
Well, there's always all sorts of accents in Cape Town over the Christmas season. Kwena Maloko, thank you very much indeed, from Equity Research Sales at ABSA CIB. In a moment, we'll find out more about digital advertising. Would like to hear from you any digital adverts that you've seen that actually made you change your behavior. You clicked through, whatever it was. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. You with The Money Show, just gone 6:30.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
Good to hear from you this evening. Well, I asked the question, are there examples of digital advertising that have made you change your behavior, made you actually click through? Jonathan's on the line from Swane tonight. Jonathan, good evening. You actually work in the digital marketing industry. What examples do you have?
Yes, Stephen. Hi. I've been working in the industry for 20 years, and as such, I've made a living from performance-based advertising, which is a step further than just digital advertising, because agencies like ours that work in performance-based advertising literally only earn when the ad works. So as a result, we've become extremely good at the analytics and testing the different creative, making sure that what goes out does actually have influence over the consumer decision. Now, that might sound kind of below the belt, but in actual fact, what we're doing is positioning advertising that makes you look, makes you click, generates an interest, and then we measure all of those different elements to make sure that it performs and it does what it's supposed to.
What works? Please tell me that a big flashing sign doesn't work, because that's so irritating.
Yeah, a lot of people say the banner is dead, but it comes down to attention. And, these days consumers have accessibility at their fingertips. They can literally look up anything. So a lot of what we do, for instance, would be geared around understanding the consumer behavior and understanding where they are in their customer journey. So, for instance, if somebody's been looking at particular topics like motor vehicles, having that in your audience data and understanding what they're already looking at. You mentioned the example of you were particularly interested in getting into solar, and then the solar ad popped up. Now, if it was a savvy digital marketer, what he would have done is he would have received some sort of measurement of your intent before you even knew it. And this is what a lot of the programmatic advertising platforms and social media platforms do so well, because they understand you and they know what you're looking at. All that data becomes part of the audience segmentation that's available to media buyers at scale. And that's what we use. Obviously, you can still have terrible advertising. So you need an ad that works. You need something that resonates with the consumer. And of course, you've got to do it ethically and make sure that you're not misleading your consumers.
Jonathan from Pretoria, thank you very much. Really appreciate those insights. Well, his comments come as the 2024 Interactive Advertising Bureau South African Online Ad Spend Report, bit of a mouthful, confirming now that there's been an increase of nearly 22% in the amount of money spent in online advertising or digital advertising in this country. Paula Hully is the IAB South Africa Advertising Revenue Report Lead and Managing Director at Digitas Licorice. Paula, good evening to you. In any industry, to see an increase in spending over 20% is huge. Things are clearly moving very quickly for you.
Absolutely. I think as Jonathan said, advertising follows where the customer goes, and the customer has moved online. We've all moved online. We're actually in viable moments more often. So you can absolutely see that mirrored in the ad spend. So yes, it's a 21.5% increase. So that's 15 billion to 17.8 billion. And that's off a growth of double digits last year of 10% and 43% growth the year before that, which was 2021, after obviously, the big lockdown and obviously a lot of people moving online over that period. So yeah, it is an incredible growth that we're seeing in this space.
What is that money being spent on? Is it space? Is it, in other words, on websites? Is it about the kind of ads? Is it on producing the ads? Where's the money going?
No, a great question. Actually, the 17.8 billion is on paid media alone. So 90% of that is actually in paid search, 8% on paid social. So that's your paid advertising on Facebook or Meta, like Instagram, TikTok, big increase there, slight dip on, X, formerly known as Twitter. That excludes any growth in terms of the production behind that. So any creative production, website building, investments in data and mobile or larger internet spend, which I think is, even more, lot more money. This amount, this 17.8 billion, is just on the paid media side.
When you talk about paid search, you mean paying to be the first hit on Google?
Yes. Well, actually, interestingly, Google has 99% of that spend, so you are right there. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's a huge amount that they're getting just to be the first hit. It tells you that if you own the platform, you win.
I think it's a little bit more complex, but and I'm sure Jonathan can probably speak to that. But absolutely, it is really understanding how to target customers, understanding how people are searching. Absolutely, and really trying to understand that customer and turning up first at the right time.
All sorts of markets and companies are being disrupted by artificial intelligence, and I'm sure in your world that must be the case. Is that helping your members sort of target their customers better? Is it helping them to produce better advertising?
Absolutely. I think in the viewpoint that AI improves customers or our lives, absolutely. I think we're really looking to, in that search, like we mentioned, or in any kind of advertising, be relevant. And as Jonathan also said, we want to turn up in a way that's meaningful for the customers and to be relevant, to be authentic, to add value. And AI can really help us do this. And we do it in a couple of ways. So one is really what we call dynamic content. So that's allowing us to personalize the message at scale. So not only does it could call me by name, or it could know what I like, and then make sure that I'm receiving something that's of value to me. Or I can then create that production at scale. So I can translate it into multiple languages, which means the content the person is receiving on the other side is even more relevant or meaningful. And then, of course, in smart media, which is really the third bucket, which is probably, a lot about what our report's about. In terms of programmatic media, AI has been part of programmatic media for quite some time. But, every minute or every year it kind of evolves. And, it's really great to see the progress in that space too.
I mean, I appreciate that, advertising wants to be meaningful and AI and all the rest. But isn't it also getting tougher to punch through the noise? I mean, ads are everywhere. We all kind of know what happens when we search. We kind of know someone's paid for it. That must make it harder for advertisers to actually be heard. We just get more and more cynical all the time.
Well, absolutely. I think the first thing you're speaking to is in terms of clutter. There is a lot out there. Again, people are more often on their screens, and there's a lot more devices to reach. There are a lot more platforms to advertise on. But yes, you do want to avoid the noise, and strategy is absolutely instrumental, being customer first. So with all the new technology, if your strategy is not clear and you're not thinking customer first and you don't have a great idea, you really are not going to get through. So that's a vital part of making this all work.
Over 20% this year. I mean, I would imagine the same is probably going to happen next year.
We are seeing that movement. I mean, if we look at the States, for example, they are, 389, digital is 77% of $389 billion. So we're at 40% of total advertising spend. US at 77%, yes. So we could probably see us starting to move in that direction.
Paula Hulley, thank you very much indeed. The IAB South Africa Advertising Revenue Report Lead and Managing Director at Digitas Licorice.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud host of the ABSA Champagne in Africa Festival 2024. ABSA is an authorized FSP and registered credit provider.
7 minutes to 7 the time. Well, underway at the University of Johannesburg tomorrow, a Jobs and Skills Summit. As I understand it, the point is to ensure the higher education system is producing people, graduates who have the skills that our economy needs. The Deputy Minister of Higher Education is the DA's Dr. Mimi Gondwe. Deputy Minister, good evening. Thanks for your time tonight. What are you hoping for from the summit?
Good evening, Stephen, and good evening to your listeners on 702. What I'm really hoping to get from the summit tomorrow is outcomes. I'm an outcomes-based person, and that's why I thought, let me have the summit where we bring together the sector, the PSET sector, we bring together business, we bring together academia, and we start talking about how do we ensure that the learners that come out of the sector, have skills that are demanded and needed by the economy, and can be absorbed into that economy, either as employees or entrepreneurs. You'll know that, Stephen, we have really high levels of unemployment in the country currently. And I think we've also been compelled by the Government of National Unity and the Medium-Term Development Plan that informs this Government of National Unity. That plan only has 3 priorities. And the first priority is around, driving inclusive growth and job creation. The second one is around, tackling poverty and the high cost of living. The third one is around building a capable and ethical developmental state. So it's also a conversation for the sector together with business to have a conversation around how we're going to ensure that we respond to those 3 priorities of the current administration. The previous administration had 7 priorities, and now they've been whittled down to 3 priorities, as I mentioned. Okay. And so the summit is about ensuring that, we have conversations with business, with academia around ensuring that, learners that come out of the PSET sector, have the skills that are demanded and needed by the economy. Because unless that happens, Stephen, there's no way we're going to be able to tackle poverty and unemployment.
No, sure.
And the level of unemployment is never going to come down.
So, Deputy Minister, I'm sorry to say this, but there are all sorts of summits and conferences about youth unemployment. I don't know if any of them have an impact. Now, look, the people who hold them, you yourself and others, are well-meaning. I get it. And yes, we need to bring the country's best experts to the problem. But I don't know if these events make any difference. The problem really is, and we need to understand this correctly, I think, it's a regional problem. The countries around us have the same problem. And it is an economic problem. And fundamentally, there may be a political aspect to it. But why will a summit like this make any difference?
So what's different about this summit? Number one, Stephen, it's being held under the Government of National Unity. So we've got different political players now in government. And number two, as I said, it's outcomes-based. So what I want to take out of the summit, what I want everybody that's going to take part in the summit to do is to come up with commitments, undertakings, and pledges that will see us partnering, business and the sector partnering together to ensure that we address this issue of learners that are coming out of the sector without the skills that are demanded and needed by the economy, and they end up staying at home and the like. So that's where the difference comes in with the summit. And I think the great thing also about the summit is that we'll have research-based presentations at the summit, presentations that really speak to what's going on and will get us thinking in terms of coming out with outcomes, with pledges, with commitments and undertakings. And I must tell you this, even before the summit began, there's a gentleman that came forward and he's taking part in the summit and said, I've got this initiative that will see 1,000 young people employed. And so we've got people who are already committed and coming up. And my conversations with the private sector as well, because I've been very intentional and deliberate, Stephen, about having conversations with the private sector on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. So I've secured a partnership with Old Mutual that's around getting learners that are in rural TVET colleges to have access to employment opportunities or information around employment opportunities. Okay. Instead of them going to industries will now be coming to those learners in the TVET colleges. Sure. So the private sector is willing and able to come to the table and help us deal with the problem of unemployment.
That's always been the case. I'm sorry to say this, but that's always been the case. The problem is that the private sector is not actually growing in a way that creates jobs. That's really the problem.
Yes, Stephen, but I think we need to have this conversation with the private sector as a PSET sector.
Sure, but we've had this conversation a million times, is my point.
No, but this is a conversation with a difference. For the first time, we're going to say, we're going to have the private sector come on board and say, these are the skills that I need, these are the skills that I demand, and if you produce so many learners with a skill, I'm going to ensure that they are either absorbed as employees or set up as entrepreneurs. So we're going to have those kind of conversations where we're going to see tangibles, we're going to see outcomes right there and there.
Okay. Deputy Minister, you've been in government for several months now. The higher education ministry, I think, does matter to our economy, really matters. How are you finding it being inside?
Stephen, it's been a learning curve for me because previously I was a member of parliament. I served on state security, and then I went to public service and administration, and then I went to public enterprises. So I think it's been an eye opener for me. I've learned so much about the sector. I've always described myself as somewhat of a university snob. Having studied at UCT, Rhodes, and then getting my master's and PhD at Stellenbosch. So I didn't really know much about TVET colleges and community colleges and the like. And so I've embarked on a tour where I try and have conversations with TVET colleges so I can get to know more about them and the like. And now I know more about TVET colleges. I think, the idea before for me was that if you go to a TVET college, then you're not good enough to be in a university. And I've seen that that's not necessarily the case. I've seen good work come out of TVET colleges. I've seen learners that are really making an impact, especially around the technology space. And I've been having conversations with heads of ICT companies as well. I've had a conversation with them around the skills that are needed and demanded by the economy. And, they're talking about future skills around coding, robotics, and AI. And I've seen TVETs that have actually started rolling out those programs, etc. But I'm going to try and help them to come up with more partnerships with heads of ICT companies that will see, a lot more of these future skills, being offered by TVET colleges.
Deputy Minister, thank you very much indeed. The Deputy Minister of Higher Education from the DA, Dr. Mimi Gondwe. You're with The Money Show at 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, proud host of the ABSA Champagne in Africa Festival 2024. ABSA is an authorized FSP and registered credit provider. Good evening, I'm Stephen Grootes. I don't know what you make of that conversation we had with Dr. Mimi Gondwe, the Deputy Minister for Higher Education. And from time to time, I suppose about once a week, someone will send us a press release or a statement or a request or whatever it is, talking about some events trying to deal with youth unemployment. Now, as I said in that conversation, as I said in a different conversation with Harambi last week, I completely and utterly accept that the people doing this have good intentions. I completely accept that. But none of it, I just get a sense that we're kind of, playing at the edges. We're not actually dealing with the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is that companies don't want to grow. That's the fundamental problem. There are other fundamental problems. The fact that so many of our young people have been betrayed by our basic education system, I think, is another fundamental problem. The fact that we're an economy really still of insiders and outsiders in many ways is a fundamental problem. But I don't know if these conferences make much of a difference. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying I have a better idea. Don't get me wrong. I'm just not sure that we actually really understand the scale and the depth of the problem. 011 883 0702 and 021 4460 567. I'd really appreciate a view from you on that, actually, please, because it is the biggest question that we deal with. And I suspect that probably on this program is the biggest issue that we're going to be talking about for a very, very long time to come. We'll talk about sustainability in a moment. 91 have launched their own sort of accelerator to support the Earthshot Prize. We'll be talking a little bit later as well about what's happening on our continent. Dr. Rutendo Ndwengwe is with us. In fact, he's sitting behind me now. He'll be with you in just a few moments. And then the link between your financial wealth and your mental health. We'll speak to Gugu Sadaki, Director and Wealth Manager at Wealth Creed from 7:30. Absolutely vital. If you've ever wanted to know why you feel like we do, I think that could be really, really important. Nice to have you along. It's 10 minutes after 7.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
So as a general rule, we don't do a lot of royal news on The Money Show. I mean, maybe that's something we should change. I suppose I should mention, that the British traditional leader known as Prince William is currently in the country. He's been here for what's known as the Earthshot Prize. It gives 5 winning solutions, £1 million each every year until 2030. Well, 91 launching their own accelerator to support this today. Nazmira Muller is the Chief Sustainability Officer at 91. Nazmira, good evening. What are you trying to do with this accelerator? How's it going to work?
Good evening, Stephen. I think what we find is a lot of what Earthshot is doing well is identifying businesses that are able to have significant social and climate impact and providing them with support, well, for the winner in each year, with significant financial support that they can then use to scale up their operations and maximize that climate and social impact. So what we recognize is that for many of these companies that are coming into the Earthshot assessment, that may not necessarily be a winner, they still need support. And what we're looking to do is provide that technical assistance in their development and allow them to actually maximize their potential. Because what Earthshot has done is in coming to Africa, they're focusing particularly on that youth-led companies, and they're actually trying to identify those that are having the most impact here.
You say they must be primarily South Africa focused, I think was the phrase. Does that mean they have to be based here? Does it have to be by South Africans?
There has to be a strong South African linkage. So preferably based here, preferably employing a significant share of South Africans in their workforce. In an ideal world, it's South African companies that are scaling up their operations and exporting into the rest of the world or expanding into the rest of the world. But it's primarily South African, but we're also looking at companies across the continent.
What kind of sort of solutions are you expecting? I mean, I'm almost certain a lot of them will be to do with generating power, and maybe some will involve water in some way.
Well, it depends. I mean, these are, it's actually a bit more, it's a broader spectrum than just that. So yes, there's a lot of water and power related issues, but the first project that we've identified that is going to be supported by the accelerator is Abelobi, which is a company that provides services to local fishing communities in South Africa and have started to expand abroad as well. So this is everything in terms of data collection, in terms of verifying the sustainability of their fishing harvest, in terms of creating a marketplace with local buyers. If you think about it, restaurants in Cape Town or supermarkets in Cape Town being able to purchase from them, but then also providing financial services into the communities, including a savings product, which is backed by Capitec.
Okay. And I mean, just to be clear, the small print, Nazmira, the intellectual property, they keep it?
Yes. No. So, this is not about us buying a share in the company. This is about what in the development world would be called technical assistance. So we provide, to us together with our partners in the space, provide actual technical assistance, some of which may come in cash, some of which may come in knowledge and support in order to help them overcome the problems they're facing and scale up.
No, sure. I mean, I accept that, but it's just, I ask everybody who gives other companies a prize, Nazmira, because you never know the answer. I find it interesting because it would be rational to assume that capitalism would kind of harness anything that would save the planet. So any new technology, anything that does something in a more sustainable way would actually see capital rushing towards it. And that's not necessarily happening. The fact that Earthshot exists, the fact that you're doing this, maybe suggests that there's some kind of market failure here. I find that really interesting.
You mean externalities may actually exist?
Indeed. Well, I mean, it's just interesting that you would think that if someone came up with a bright idea, capital would rush to it automatically, and that's not what's happening.
Well, I think part of the issue is not all externalities are priced.
Yeah.
So if we think about it purely in climate terms, there is a large conversation happening globally on the need for some sort of carbon pricing, carbon trading. It's a big topic coming up for the COP in Baku next week is, will we finally be able to get a international inter-country carbon trading mechanism under Article 6 done? And that's been a long time coming, and there's no certainty it will be done next week. And that is about actually pricing an externality. When you then come down to social externalities, it would be nice to think that capital will rush to these areas. But until we have some mechanism to value the positive or negative cost of the externality, it's much more tricky.
Nazmeera, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate the time. Nazmeera Mula is the Chief Sustainability Officer at 91.
The Money Show.
The Africa Business Report.
Dr. Rotendo Ndengwi is the founding director of Tribe Africa Advisory, also author of Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded. Rotendo, good evening. Thanks as always for coming in tonight. Niger is disputing this move by a French firm involving uranium.
Yeah. Good evening to you, Steve, and to your listeners. And yeah, an interesting topic. So Niger, obviously, we know that it's one of those countries in the Sahel region, a military junta led by President, or I can't call him President, commander of the junta, did a coup d'etat last year, which was successful. But one of the main sort of resources that Niger has is uranium. And in 2022, they were one of the biggest suppliers of uranium to the EU, followed by Kazakhstan. So you can see how competitive that market is. And obviously, we know uranium is used for nuclear purposes, etc., etc. But where the dispute has happened is that under the new military junta, which is anti the French, Niger leadership has come out, and a few months ago, they withdrew one of the permits for Orano, which is a big French mining company, and told them, guys, they no longer have permits in terms of one of the big major deposits that was there, and that was a bad thing. Now, more recently, Orano has seemingly retaliated, and they've said, okay, we are stopping producing or getting the uranium out of the ground, and the total, I think, value is $360 million. So the challenge with all of this thing is obviously reflecting in terms of when you've got a military takeover, it goes anti some of the multinationals that have invested in the country for over 50 years, and that's what Orano has done. They've been in Niger for the last 50 years. You kind of have to be diplomatic but political at the same time, and that's the challenge, and that's what's happening now. I mean, Niger is a country, population of 27 million, GDP of about 17 billion. So I think the challenge that is there is that, and what's becoming more, what people are beginning to realize, especially the military juntas, is that it's easier said than done when you do these coup d'etats and you go anti-West. There are consequences, and the question is, can you stomach those consequences?
I mean, it's the great thing about democratic politics is it does teach you about consequences, and it teaches you that power is very interesting. The French are obviously, I mean, it was foreseeable. Anyone could have told you that this was going to happen. The question is, what do you do now? And it's a lot of money, $330 million.
It's a lot of money, and money that the country needs in one way from an economic development perspective. I think they've tried to negotiate. I think Orano has come and said, guys, look, let's compromise. Let's either, take production and work with Namibia. Let's work with France and try and get this sorted out. But I think when you're dealing with military juntas, whereby obviously the leadership is very highly politicized, it's going to be a challenge. And I think that Sahel region, that whole belt, whether it's Mali or any of the other countries, it's the same dilemma. So it'll be interesting to see how it comes out. Unfortunately, Stephen, with all these things, the people that suffer are the ordinary men on the ground. There's that African proverb, when two elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. So unfortunately, that's what it means. So hopefully there's a solution or a compromise that's eventually found.
The policies around advancing educational technology in Africa, and I remember during the pandemic, I mean, I sort of drunk the Kool-Aid a little bit. I don't drink it so much anymore. I thought maybe this would change the way education works, and yet the results don't really seem to be there. But for our continent, this would be huge.
Yeah, so, when you look at education, it's one of the areas that Africa needs to develop, and we've always known there's a huge gap that is there. Just to give you some stats, at the moment, I was looking at UNESCO figures, we need about 150 million teachers to teach, and that's the gap that is there, to teach and address the gap in terms of the secondary and primary school children that is there. So 150 million teachers, but over and above that, there are about 108 million kids that need to get into secondary and primary school. So you've got this huge challenge. Now, I'm always conscious with regards to technology and leapfrogging in terms of solving Africa's problem, because I think a lot of things are hidden under that. But to solve a problem like this, where there's such a huge scale, practically the only way you can do it is leveraging off technology. And that's why there's the need for educational technology, because you can't pump enough physical bodies out into the African space to address this. But using technology, using AI to scale and accelerate the solutions will make a big difference. So MasterCard has got an index that they use, and some of the leading countries that are doing this, and this is where the issue of policy comes in terms of saying there has to be policy led by government that allows not only to attract investors, but more importantly, to equip the right people in the right areas in terms of dealing with this deficit. So the countries that have got those policies at the moment, the leading countries is Rwanda, is Ghana, and then there's Ethiopia. They've got practical policies that they've put in place that are being enforced by government. But the downside of this, I was looking at the Partech report that tracks VC investment in terms of tech startups. And the challenge you've got at the moment, the leading attraction of VC investment in Africa for 2023 is your normal, when I say criminal, the normal culprits, fintech, e-commerce, health tech. Unfortunately, educational technology is right at the bottom. I mean, just to give you some figures, Stephen, for 2023, we tracked it about 36 million for last year. But the previous year, we tracked it this is 2022, we tracked it $130 million US. So it's one of those misnomers whereby usually we say there's a big problem that sort of quantifies the opportunity. Let's attract investors both within Africa and externally to come and invest, but that's not happening. And if we don't fix this problem, we're going to have a big consequential problem, because then it rolls out in terms of STEM and all the other challenges that come around that.
It's also, I mean, if you crack this, you're going to make a fortune. You're going to make a fortune. You're going to make lots of money.
You'll make lots of money. I think the problem with ed tech or in the educational space is that, how do you make the money? And I think that's why the VC attraction, if you crack the solution, both from an investor, return on investment perspective, and an investor, then we've definitely got it. But I think the challenge that is there is that the guys are looking at it, they understand the problem. They say, guys, if we can fund it, but we just don't see the return on investment. And it's a frustrating situation, because there's huge opportunity with regards to doing this, but it's not coming through. And as I said, if you look at the figures that are there, and I was also looking at from a government policy, what are the key three things that countries need to do to drive the right policy? And the three things that stick out, Stephen, is that obviously put something in place to accommodate the technology, so actually get the right technology in place. The second thing is the gender gap. Educate more girls to the same effort that you're doing boys, and then monitor and evaluate in terms of the progress and the result of that. If we get the right policies, that will probably also contribute to attracting the right investors, but time will tell.
And then luxury tourism. Benin is getting its first 5-star hotel from this French brand. It's called Sofitel. Yeah, so, and again, it's the French, been quite active in Africa, so and in West Africa. So Benin, when you fly from Nigeria, and I've done the flight from Nigeria to Ghana, 2 strips of land. You pass Benin and Togo, and when you look at the time zone, I always laugh, because you leave at 7 o'clock in the morning, you rise at 7 o'clock in the morning, because it's exactly an hour difference. So it's like you go into a time space. But Benin, a great country, again a small country, GDP of 20 billion, population of 14 million. Has been independent since 1960. So I think that's about 64 years, if my maths is right. Sofitel, a big multinational in the hotel industry business, has opened up the first 5-star hotel in Benin in the last month. So, you take things for granted. You look at ourselves in South Africa, because obviously South Africa or Southern Africa leads the tourism industry. But I was just shocked. That was the first that blew me away, that, wow, these guys have their first 5-star hotel. They're actually not a big country in terms of commodities or anything spectacular. Their main industry is agriculture. But the thing that just stuck out is that if you look at the trends, because if somebody was asking, why did Sofitel invest in Benin? And one of the things that came out was that South Africa, post-COVID,
its tourism attraction levels are going to 96%, while the global average is 88%.
Sure.
So when you talk to the leaders of Sofitel, the big thing they're saying is that they're seeing the opportunity for growth. And it also goes down to that whole thing, Stephen, is that, probably a person looked at Benin and said, gosh, there are no 5-star hotels. Why should we invest there?
Yeah.
But another person probably looked and said, gosh, there's nothing that is there. Let's invest. And they've invested. They've opened up. I think they've created employment for about 270 people. The hotel manager actually says the day that they asked for applications for the vacancies, I think there are about 270 they needed. 7,000 people responded from the country. So it's obviously stimulating the economy. Politically, they are stable. Obviously, that Sahel, West African belt is always at high risk. But it's a good story to tell just in terms of opportunity. The quantum is not that huge in the bigger picture of things. But I'm expecting that a lot of positive things will come out of this, Stephen.
It's fascinating. I love one of the focuses of this group is gastronomy, in other words, food, and rest. You can't go wrong if you manage to come out of something rested. Geesh.
Yeah, and the hotel itself is obviously the capital of Benin is Cotonou. And as I said, Sofitel itself has got about 120 hotels all over the world, and it's been successful. It's got a great track record, and I think I'm always excited. One of the key things I always say, Stephen, is that there's huge opportunity in Africa, huge opportunity in terms of areas that need to be developed. The reason I like the story is that it's not just about a hotel and brick and mortar that has been built, but it's that whole ecosystem, that whole value chain of suppliers, of manufacturers, of the service industry, of skilling that is happening in the country. And for me, that's a big thing, because that's where the future of Africa is in terms of engaging with the global world, but at the same time looking in terms of saying how can we build and develop here and work together. So it'll be interesting to see how this, maybe one day you and I with our families can go there on holiday and enjoy the retreat. But at the end of the day, a good story, and looking forward to it growing and becoming more successful.
Dr. Otendo Hundingi, always good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Founding Director, Tribe Africa Advisory, author of Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded. Bringing the time to 7:30.
The Money Show.
Personal finance.
Well, I don't know how the state of your money, the state of your wealth makes you feel, how it affects your mental health. But I think there are so many questions, and I think there'll be times in your life when you feel kind of full of the joys of spring, partly because you've got a spring in your step, partly because of what's happening to your bank balance. And there'll be times, maybe the majority of the time, where actually you feel the complete opposite. Well, Gugu Sadaki is with us. Gugu Sadaki is with us this evening, Director and Wealth Manager at Wealth Creed, and looking at this issue in depth. Gugu, good evening, and thanks for joining us on The Money Show. I really appreciate it.
Hello, Stephen. Nice to chat to you.
First, financial anxiety, and I suppose we all feel financial anxiety at times. How would you define it?
Definitely. It's just a general worry or fear around financial issues, and honestly, it can affect anybody, regardless of their socioeconomic status. And it impacts both your mental and your physical health, and can lead to issues such as depression, heart issues, insomnia, and sometimes even alterations to your immune system. So it's quite serious. So it's caused by things like debt, worries about your debt, your income, your expenses, worrying about, future investments and whether there'll be enough, and then sometimes adverse economic situations.
I always find, for me, there's that moment where you get up in the middle of the night for whatever reason, and it's suddenly, the state of your finances can suddenly sort of arrive at that point. That's kind of what you're talking about.
That's exactly it. And when you're that feeling that you're talking about, when you're lying down and it's quiet, you have time to think about really important issues, and that's really a time when it actually affects you the most.
The state of debt and mental health. There must be a strong correlation, and it must affect, I suppose, millions of people.
There definitely is. This is a UK study, but I think it applies to us as well. The Money and Mental Health Policy Institute in the UK found that financial stress can lead to mental health issues, and vice versa. So the converse is also true. So people with mental health issues tend to have financial stresses, and vice versa. And those issues, as I said, are quite diverse. But in South Africa, about 63% of South Africans experience financial anxiety. And this is according to Sanlam's benchmark report. So very, very similar findings to what we're seeing in the UK and actually globally. Almost 90% of individuals report to experiencing financial stress and it impacting their physical and mental health. And almost 60% of people acknowledge that financial stress has adverse effects on their well-being. And about half of individuals that have been surveyed struggle to cover, it's because almost half of individuals struggle to cover basic monthly expenses such as food and rent. So it's a real issue affecting real people every day.
And I mean, it affects relationships, right? Marriages get affected by it because there's not enough money. It affects relationships between siblings because, can you lend me 300 Rand to get through the month? I mean, it has a big impact. It goes on and on and on.
Definitely. So if we look at the general well-being areas, such as your career, your community, your finances, which we're talking about now, your physical health as well as your relationships, money touches on every single aspect of you and your general well-being. So there is no aspect of an individual that isn't affected by money. So if you're having financial issues, you can almost confirm that there are going to be issues everywhere else. And as you quite rightly said, relationships are actually where the impact is seen the most. And in fact, a lot of divorces that we're seeing today are largely due to issues around finances, which is quite scary.
There are also triggers, right? There are triggers that, they're triggers that make us spend money, but there are triggers as well that really make you feel in a particular way about money.
Definitely. And I think they differ for everybody. So it's important to understand what your triggers are. What is it that affects you? What is it that causes you to feel this type of anxiety? Things like, for example, emergencies. I mean, this affects most people. When you have an unexpected cost, for example, when you have an accident and your insurance company does not cover you fully for that accident, and then it forces you to go into to tap into debt, for example. Job loss is also quite a huge one that causes people to feel great amounts of financial anxiety. Family responsibility, that's quite a big one in South Africa, and we see quite a lot. I mean, we see it with our clients today. We call it black tax in South Africa, but I think it's starting to affect people across the board. A lot of people are carrying the financial burden or responsibility of looking after extended family members, and that has a huge, huge impact on their mental wellness and, in fact, general well-being. And another one that causes me a lot of distress, Stephen, is social media and peer pressure. You have no idea how often I speak to people, and they find themselves in a lot of hot water financially, largely because, they're trying to keep up with people that sometimes they don't even know that they see on social media. So it's actually quite a very, very scary one. So it really is important to understand what it is that gets you going when it comes to stresses around your finances, and to try and work around that as much as possible.
It's always, it's the same old story. You don't know the real state of someone else's finances, and you never will unless literally they tell you, and they almost certainly won't. And so what you see is not what the real story is.
That's the truth. And there's so much, I don't want to say lies, but there's so much truth that is concealed on social media. People show the best side of them on social media, and they portray, whatever it is that they can portray on social media. It isn't necessarily the truth or 100% of the truth. So it really is a futile exercise to compare your personal situation to somebody else that you hardly even know. And as you quite rightly said, sometimes people that you know would never really tell you the truth, the true extent of their financial world.
Are there ways to cope? And are there particular ways that you can try and reduce some of the stress? And it's easy for me sitting here to say, don't spend the money in the first place. But I'm just asking for a smack if I say that. Are there ways that you can cope? Where do you begin that journey?
Yeah, there are a lot of tried and tested methods, and these are the ones that probably get you a smack, as you said, because people don't want to hear this, right? But I think some of the ones that I've discovered for myself is mindfulness and like a lot of stress reduction techniques like meditation. We scoff at that, but there actually is so much value in pausing and taking stock of what's going on in your mind and in your heart. And understanding how that actually affects you both in the short and the long term. Exercise is a really, really good one. There's a lot of value, and there's a lot of research that speaks to that. There's a lot of value in burning off physically running and exercising, and your diet actually plays quite a huge role in ultimately how you feel, your general well-being. So yeah, absolutely. So your mind, your body, and what you take in are really, really huge. Communicating and talking, Stephen, is actually quite a big one. I often meet people in our practice who are carrying so much anxiety and stress, and they're not talking to anybody. So it's really, really scary. So it's important for you to find somebody that you can chat to. So that's one thing. Another way that I've found very effective, and there's a lot of international studies that confirm this, is improving your financial education. We are fortunate enough to live in the era of the internet, where a lot of information that we can access is actually free. But there's a caveat to that. You can't consume absolutely everything because there is a lot of nonsense as well. So you need to filter, and you need to be very careful about the information that you access, where you access it, and who you access it from. But there's a direct link, between your level of financial education and your financial well-being. So it really is important, and it's actually your responsibility to improve on that.
Isn't it always, if you understand the situation that you're in, and you understand how you got there, and you understand how you can get out, you may still be awake at night, but at least you have a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. But sometimes that isn't enough. Sometimes we actually have to reach out and get the help, and that was actually going to be my next point. If the mindful strategies are not working, and if improving your financial education is not improving your financial situation, it may necessitate you getting professional help, both from a financial and a mental perspective. There are a lot of great professionals out there who are really good at what they do, and a lot of them actually do the work pro bono. Sometimes it takes you just asking the question, reaching out, and you could get the help that you need.
You talk about a well-being wheel. What is that?
It's something that we use in our business to assist clients in managing their personal finances, but everything else related to them in a holistic way. As I said earlier, your finances affect everything, and everything affects your money, right? So there are, according to the Gallup Institute, there are 5 major well-being areas that we need to try to find a balance in. And the first one is career, so how you make your money. The second one is what we're talking about today, how you manage your money, so your financial security. The third one is physical well-being, so are you physically, mentally able and well enough to enjoy the money and live the life that you envisage for yourself. The fourth one is social, so your relationships. It could be love relationships, it could be family, it could be friends, but it's important for you to be connected to people, and then find a community. So loving where you live and loving the place, the specific house and area that you live in. And an individual is said to have achieved holistic well-being if there's balance in all 5 areas. But obviously that's in theory, right? But I think the important thing about understanding well-being is understanding that there are these 5 areas of well-being, and that we need to strive to achieve well-being in all areas. And there's certain tips and tricks that you can use, but I think the awareness is the first and most important step.
We're talking to Gugu Sadaki tonight, Director and Wealth Manager at Wealth Creed with Personal Finance. Your calls, of course, as always, for Gugu on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Voice notes as well on 072 702 1702. How do you feel, and how that is directly related to your money? That's the conversation we're having on The Money Show this evening.
The Money Show.
Personal finance.
011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Your questions this evening for Gugu Sadaki, Director and Wealth Manager at Wealth Creed, talking, of course, about mental health and financial wealth. Gugu, there are other things that that you can do when you're in a position where you almost despair over your money, and there are personal finance hacks. There are things that you can do to improve your situation.
Absolutely, and a lot of them are free. But so often when we make these recommendations as professionals, they're not taken that seriously until people find themselves in a really big hole. The first and I think most important one is budgeting. There is so much value in understanding where your money is going. And I always say to our clients when we chat to them is that I can't help them until they have a proper understanding of where their money is going. So the quickest and best way to get a proper understanding of how you're spending your money is to go back for the last 3 months print a few bank statements for the last couple of months and then just highlight, where that money is going. And I promise you, 9 times out of 10, people are always surprised where that money is going. And then 10 times out of 10, we always find money in the most surprising places. So, and it's always these little amounts, subscriptions here and there, it's odd coffee here. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be enjoying their coffee, but people are always surprised at how much they spend on various items in their budget. So it's really, really important to bid that down. Another important aspect that we focus on quite a bit as a business is understanding your values. So clearly articulating what it is that's important to you and then try to link that to your finances. There has to be a link between what's important to you and how you direct your money. And if there isn't, it means there's something seriously wrong that needs to be changed. So we usually give clients a list of about 20, 30 values, and we ask them to select their top 2. And that helps to sort of direct how people spend their money, and eventually the money goes where it's supposed to go. It's important for you to celebrate small wins, or milestones. So whenever you achieve a milestone, whenever you pay off that credit card or that debt, or whenever you manage to save for that holiday to go to that really nice place, it's important for you to celebrate that, because that's a way to keep yourself motivated, because we work so hard. And as we spoke about earlier, there's so much stress and anxiety associated with personal finances. So when you do achieve certain things, it's important for you to actually highlight that. So those are some of the things that we'd recommend people to.
And it's a good idea to speak to a professional, you say?
It is crucial. I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of information that's available to you online, but a qualified and experienced professional is trained and experienced, and they've seen it all, right? They're trained to help individuals, and there's so many blind spots that we don't see if we are not working and trained in the area of personal finance. So there's a lot of value in speaking to somebody who knows what they're talking about, because they can share so many things and help you strategize and come up with techniques to get you out of the hole that you're in.
And then there are a few resources as well. I mean, there are plenty of books about personal finance, and one of them, I won't say its name here for various reasons, but has done very well.
There are plenty. And much like the internet, I think it's important for you to sift through what's available there and make sure that you are taking in information that's correct and that's relevant for you. But yes, I'm happy to share my 2 top favorite books if you'd like to hear it.
Go for it.
The one is The Richest Man in Babylon. I mean, this book was written in 1926, right? And it seems so basic when you read it, but it speaks about the very fundamentals of how to manage your money. And it's based on parables. So it's written by George S. Clason, and it's invaluable. So for somebody who's not looking for anything terribly technical, but just the basics on how to manage their finances, I'd start there. And obviously the psychology of money. This talks more about behavior with money more than the technical aspects of managing money. And I think it's great insight for people who want to understand why they manage the money, but the way that they do. There's also websites. There's a lot of websites where you can access free information. I'll share 3 of them with you. The first one is with the Financial Planning Institute, which is fpimymoney123.co.za. There are videos, there are articles, there are so many resources there that are written and contributed to by professional certified financial planners who are trained, as I say, trained and experienced to help you with your personal finances.
And then there are other support services as well that are available, and some of them are very important. They're people who are very experienced.
Yeah. One really, really important resource that people, I think, tend to overlook is, so if you are employed, it really is crucial for you to look into your wellness center or services offered or sponsored by your employer, especially the larger corporates. I mean, the help that you can get from there, both from a financial and a psychological perspective, are invaluable, and they rival what's out there in the market, and you get those for free. As I said, they're sponsored. And so if you are employed and you don't know where to look and you don't know where to start, that's usually a great starting point for you. And if they can't help you, they can definitely point you in the right direction. There's also a lot of advisors this is now financial advisors, who offer services pro bono. So if you go on the FPI website and if you look on resources such as the FSCA, the Financial Services Conduct Authority, information is there of where you can, so if you can't afford financial advice, there are individuals out there who offer their services. So they're trained, they're qualified, and they can help you for free. So you just need to look.
Is it also worth just sort of, I mean, whenever you're buying, you're going to buy something, think about how I will feel about this in 5 years' time, you know, especially if it's anything big or spending money on a holiday. Just what I'm trying to get to is just the long-term view.
Absolutely. So for people who struggle to control themselves when spending their money, I always say sleep on it. You know, if there's something that you really want to spend your money on, don't spend your money right there and then. Give it a day or two and see how you feel in a day or two. And if the feeling is still there, then yes, apply that logic to say, in 5 years' time, will I still have the same feeling about this particular thing that I want to spend my money on or not? And that's usually a great gauge of whether you should be spending your money on it or not.
Gugu, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate the time. Gugu Sadaki is Director and Wealth Manager at Wealth Creed Personal Finance this evening. A lot of wisdom there that's available, of course, for you as a podcast. Might be worth forgetting the podcast and sending it to someone who you think needs to hear it.